Hey, good afternoon to you. Mark South with HurricaneTrack here. Monday now, the 2nd of December, 2024. Thank you for tuning into today's video. The main topic, 2024 season recap. A very impactful season overall, 18 named storms, 11 of those becoming hurricanes and 5 reaching major hurricane or Category 3 or higher on the old Stafford-Simpson scale. Got to talk about that scale at some point. I don't know if it'll be in today's update or for a future discussion, but I think we need to make it more about water and less about wind. Story probably for another day. Nevertheless, a very impactful season, now moving up to number 2 on the list of the costliest seasons in history. So let's take a look back and see how it all went down. Good Wikipedia article on it already. Whoever curates this has done a great job of keeping things accurate. It's interesting, just a few things that I have picked out from reading through this. The season started kind of late relative to where we've been since 2014. First named storm was June 19th with Alberto, and that was the latest first named storm since 2014. We all thought, I know I did, that we would see activity starting in May, but that didn't happen. It took all the way almost to the last third of June, and then we had Alberto, followed not too long after, of course, by Beryl, and on we went until we finally ended up there with Sarah, topping things off 18 storms later, and 11 of those, of course, becoming hurricanes, 5 major hurricanes, and that was pretty much what was expected. I do want to point out a couple things related to the seasonal forecast activity. Way back a year ago in December 2023, TSR, that's Tropical Storm Risk out of the UK, projected 20, 9, and 4. 18, 11, and 5 is what we ended up with, so that's pretty close. Colorado State University, April 4th, 23, 11, and 5. I would make the argument we had a couple of additional named storms that could be added, but nevertheless a pretty good forecast, especially the 11 and the 5 part. And, you know, we had that dead period during the season, which I'll show you graphically in just a minute. It's pretty amazing. But generally speaking, the seasonal guidance was spot on, especially for the hurricanes, the major hurricanes, the amount of ACE that would be generated on the lower end of what was expected, because again, we had that dead period that nobody seems to be able to explain thoroughly in terms of why it happened. We know what happened, but in terms of why, we're still working on that. But overall, the seasonal outlooks were pretty spot on. And unfortunately, when people are right about that, I don't make these forecasts, I just report them to you. Usually it means something bad is going to happen to people. And that's exactly what happened. And thus, we take a look at the landfall map. This is a graphic that was produced by our very own CJ. Appreciate him cooking this up for us. All across the western part of the basin here, started with the islands. Pretty devastating, you know, with Beryl. And then eventually going on through the rest of the named storms, most of them impacting the lower 48 of the United States. Certainly a few down in Central America. And then, of course, we had our landfall of Ernesto in Bermuda. I was there for that. And it was a big season. I mean, this says it all. It is about the impacts to people. 2020 had 30 named storms, but a lot of those were out over the open Atlantic, just wandering around. They would last 2 or 3 days. Some of those named storms, and the ACE, even though it was pretty high, it was 180 or so in 2020. We had less named storms this year, and our ACE was comparable had we kept up with the pace back in the middle part of the season, if that makes sense. In other words, you can have a lot of named storms, but you usually don't have a very high ACE. Another way, finally, to look at that, 30 named storms in 2020, you'd expect the ACE score to be like 250 or something. It wasn't. It was only 180 because a lot of those named storms 4 years ago, again, were short-lived, out over the open Atlantic, whatever. I mean, a couple of them in the Gulf that were pretty short-lived too. They were just everywhere. Contrast that to this year where the ACE happened near land and we had major, major impacts. Milton, Debbie, all across the area, you know, Francine, Beryl, Alberto, it goes on and on and on, right? So great map here from our friend CJ. Appreciate him putting this together for us. What a year it has been. So let's go on and look at this interesting graphic here from Ryan over at WeatherTiger. Just an amazing visualization of the dead period. I really, really like this. Let's use the color blue up here to help highlight it. So we got started early with Beryl right here, and then we had another big peak over here, obviously, that contained Helene and Milton and pretty much everything else for the most part. But look at the period in between, only punctuated by basically Ernesto. Everything else was generally flat. Climatologically speaking, it should have been a pretty steep rise in here, and then it comes back down again, but we didn't see that. And again, not really any real solid reason as to why. Yes, dry air, yes, more stable, whatever, but like why? Why did that get set up like that, and why didn't the climate models see this? You know, we were expecting 20, 25 named storms, and we didn't get too far off from it, certainly. I don't want to overemphasize named storms. It was the hurricanes that'll generally get you. We know we can get impacts, significant impacts from tropical storms, but this is really interesting in here, this period of time where we just had not much happening. Really interesting to see, and this is a cool way to visualize that. We really appreciate Ryan at WeatherTiger putting that together. And he goes on to talk about the distribution of the different chunks of the season, just a tremendous amount of data through here. And I'm going to put a link to this thread in today's update so you can read about it yourselves. All right? Another bunch of stats comes from our friends over at the Hurricane Hunters. This, of course, is the 53rd Weather Reconnaissance Unit down there at Keesler. Pretty good infographic. Look at the hours they flew. 1,130 flying hours, 107 missions, over 1,200 dropsons, 12 storms they flew, plus 2 in the Pacific. A very, very busy season for the men and women that do that. And, of course, you have the NOAA side. I haven't seen their stats yet. But NOAA, Department of Commerce, they flew their missions from the G4 to the P3s. There were the sail drones that were out there. All kinds of efforts put into studying, researching, and reconning so that we could benefit from it, the Atlantic hurricanes that affected so many people across the basin. So it has been a remarkable stretch here in the last 24 years, going back to the year 2000, so I guess inclusive 25 total seasons. But there is a stretch there from 2005 to 2017, 12 years, where we had no major hurricane landfalls. And then all of a sudden, something happened in 2017, pattern change, coincidence, I don't know. It is a pretty short sample size, but just think about it. 2005 was the last of the major hurricanes, if we look at it actually coupled with 2004, right? 2004, pretty big season. 2005, pretty big season. Obviously, lumped together, absolutely historic, those two by themselves. But then you take that out and you go 12 years later, and then from 2017 through this season, you had the likes of Harvey, Ian, Adalia, Michael in there, of course, Category 5, Zeta, Milton, Laura, Irma, which made a couple of landfalls there in Florida, Ida in 2021, Helene this year, Milton this year. If I didn't say Milton, it's on the list too. Yeah, there it is. So really strange, these stretches that we've gone with very little major hurricane activity and thus not much damage overall. 2012 had Sandy, yes, but isolated, kind of an anomaly. Everything else, though, has been since 2017 and inclusive of that year. And then I want to bring this to your attention. Notice nothing over here. And the map does not go up the East Coast at all. Now, Sandy was major impact, but not a major hurricane. The major hurricanes, your Category 3s or higher, are making landfall for whatever reason along the Gulf Coast, since and including all the way back to 2005. Almost 20 years now. 20 years of all of them, the major hurricanes, making landfall along the Gulf Coast. That is really weird. Got to talk to people like Dr. Klotzbach about that. What is going on? Why is that happening? These are questions that we will look at as we go forward. And is this going to be the new norm for the coming decades. We know that these things are typically cyclical, if Mark can just spit it out. And so we don't know. We just know what we have been through, and it has been quite remarkable. So just since 2022, Florida starting to resemble what we saw in the 40s and 50s. Not quite as bad, where Florida was just bulldozed over and over, it seemed. But one big difference. In that era, you had a lot of activity that came on the east side of Florida, whereas recently, these last few years, most of it has been on the west coast of Florida, the Big Bend region. And this doesn't include some of the tropical storms that we've had come in here. Even Ada back in 2020, fairly significant, especially for the Tampa Bay area, some storm surge flooding, maybe even shooting a shot across the bow of what was going to be coming in years later, right? Remember Ada 4 years ago? I remember. I know it doesn't seem like that long ago, but 4 years, a lot has happened. So just a very different look to where things have been, and it's been basically the Gulf Coast for the major activity. All right, so one part of the reason that we had such a busy season overall, of course, a lot is made of this. I use this a lot because it tells the story probably more than anything, and that, of course, is our sea surface temperatures and the anomalies, the departures from the long-term 30-year average. And what we saw this year was the development of the La Nina out here. This is the current map. But more important than that, the loss of the El Nino, just not having El Nino, the abnormal warming out here, not having that, plus the warm Atlantic, generally means you're going to have a busy Atlantic hurricane season. That's pretty much just what you can expect. And that is exactly what happened this year. However, last year, 2023, we had a strong El Nino and a very busy Atlantic hurricane season. How could both be true at once? More research needs to be done on that. There's no easy answer as well, because, believe it or not, 2023 had more named storms than did 2024. Yet we had the La Nina this year. So just an interesting couple of years in a row overall. I think we can all agree to that. Now, one aspect to this that I do wonder about going forward. Are we in a permanent pattern of a warm Atlantic? I say permanent, several years, where this is going to stay, and then this is the one that's going to oscillate. We're either going to be in negative INSO or positive INSO with a constant warm Atlantic. Again, questions I want to ask some of my colleagues. I want to bring this up at conferences, things like that. This needs to be looked at. Can the climate models help us with this? I don't know. I think it would be important. And then the other part of it, why is the Gulf of Mexico the target right now? We have had no major hurricanes in this area in 20 years. That is remarkable. It really is. Major impacts, absolutely, and that's again where the Saffir-Simpson scale can be misleading, but in terms of your category 3 or higher, that's a big nope. It's all been on the Gulf Coast side of things, and remarkably so. As I showed you, it's not even just a couple. It has been a lot. So there's a few things to think about as we go forward over the next year, certainly looking into 2025, and then even further out in time, we're talking about decade time scales from there. And again, stuff I want to talk to my colleagues about, very, very much so. And speaking of El Nino, La Nina, that kind of thing, kind of a little bit of a sneak peek ahead to what we would look for, sort of keys to the game here. No forecast. HurricaneTrack, we do not make forecasts here. I don't have seasonal outlooks. I don't make my own forecast. I can have a hunch, and I can tell you I think something might be different than the way it is presented, and I give you my reasons behind it. But no, I don't do forecasts. That is not my area of expertise. It is more about, hopefully, solid communication, and then absolutely it speaks for itself, the field work that I do and we do as a community here. All of that is based on, of course, what will the coming hurricane season be like? And this is one of the keys to figuring that out. I just showed you the anomalies map. We do have the La Nina baking in here pretty good. Baking, relative term, right? And it looks like it's going to continue. This is the CFS V2 going out, through July, almost into August of next year. a pretty good crash coming up in the anomalies here. This is where we are now. This is your zero line, which is not zero. It's just an index. It's like it's neutral. Think of zero as neutral. And this is on the plus side. This is on the minus side. And we are below average right now in the Nino 3.4 area. Basically, that means we're in La Nina, and the background state looks like it's going to stay that way for the coming months. The blue areas here are your most recent runs of the different ensemble members. And I believe this because look at this. This is the forecast here of the zonal wind anomalies. That would be your 5,000-foot winds roughly through this area right through here. Pretty good representation of it. And all of these blues and purples you see here, those are very strong easterly wind, meaning a continuation of this La Nina type pattern right on through December. Now, will this continue into 2025? Well, again, we go back to this graphic here. CFS V2 thinks so, meaning that once we get to hurricane season, which starts right about here, we would be cool side of neutral, so just a little bit below average in the sea surface temperature department in the equatorial Pacific. And then the next part of the puzzle, and the next question we should ask, what does this look like June 1st and beyond next year? Do we hold on to this warm look to the Atlantic, the deep tropics out here, the Gulf? I don't know. We'll have to just wait and see. Some of the modeling already that you look at, the NMME, the CANSIPs, these ensemble packages that go many months out. And remember, these are large puzzle pieces, easier to predict than where something might be, hurricanes, whatever. Those are your synoptic scale, shorter time features. I think the bottom line here, my point, we might just be in this pattern where the background state generally favors busy Atlantic hurricane seasons unless something flips. So I would just assume that next year will be a continuation. 15, 20 named storms, probably 10 hurricanes. Why not? What are the arguments against having another very busy season? And then, of course, it all comes down to where do they track? And how strong are they when they get there? What kind of impacts do they bring? Is it a big rain event again? Those are the questions that nobody can have any definitive insight to this far out. Nothing of any helpful value. So, basically just looking at history, I would make sure I am very well prepared along the Gulf Coast and certainly stay as prepared as I can be elsewhere because you never know. But man, this pattern of Gulf hurricanes, really got to look into that more and more in the off season. And as I do so, I'll keep you updated. All right. Speaking of getting into 2025, what are we going to do? Well, as you can tell, it's December 2nd. The hurricane season's over and we're still here. Even though it is HurricaneTrack, you might hopefully be aware that over the last basically 10 years, we've been able to really expand beyond just hurricanes for a number of reasons, namely the support, the crowdfunding through Patreon. My work currently with Fox Weather really helps with that as well. This is a very expensive endeavor, not the video part, the going out into the field part. Very expensive, especially with all the equipment that we set out. And we're able to do that more and more. So we cover things like winter weather, and I'm really looking forward to that, especially using our 360 cams and really immersing you in some of this activity as we go forward. Was hoping to have gone up, and would have loved to have gone up for the big lake effect event, but you know what? Thanksgiving, and I wasn't going to miss that. I have been gone. Here's a stat for you. I don't know the exact amount of time, but I know for a fact that 2024, I was out of the house and out on the road working more than any other year, even 2020, because I did all of this severe weather stuff and a couple of big winter storms and then several of these hurricanes in Bermuda for several days. And we get to Thanksgiving and the entire family was down here. And I'm like, I'll just have to sit this lake effect event out. There will be plenty more. The Great Lakes, just to give you a heads up, are still very much warmer than normal. So there'll be a lot more where that came from, I assure you. But nor'easters, the big ones you get off the coast of Massachusetts especially, but anything, one of those big blockbusters that goes up the East Coast, definitely going to be on top of that. And then next spring, what we're going to do during spring severe and hail season will be pretty remarkable. We're working on a couple of projects to just, again, tell you the story even better. Show you what's happening out there, some of these interesting ways of viewing things, the 360 cams, trying to get cams closer to some of these impacts. You know, maybe even dipping our finger a little bit into the tornado realm of how we can visualize what they do. There's a lot of research already going on, thousands of chasers out there. What can we do to stand out and make a difference too, and not just be somebody in the way? We're working on all that, but especially the Hail Project Season 2, really looking forward to that. Accomplished a lot with that in our first season. And then, I mean, before you know it, you know how time is these days. It seems to just zip on by faster than ever. Somebody's cheating with that clock. I swear it is. We're back to hurricane season. June 1st, 2025, it all starts again, May 15th for the East Pack. And we'll see. Again, I fully expect, unless there's some drastic change in both basins, that it'll be another busy Atlantic hurricane season. That seems to be the norm. And then one of my favorite things or aspects that are not related to hurricanes is the monsoon, the southwest monsoon. Cannot wait for that. I sat it out this year because there really wasn't much to do. There wasn't a prevalent monsoon season. There was a few days that were pretty good out there. There always are. But maybe we get a return to a more robust monsoon signal for 2025, and we'll be out there. And you know what? I'm going to tell you this. The use of Starlink, we did that so much this year, starting with, I guess it was Ernesto, and then Francine, and everything after. Our uptime on the vehicle cam was the most that it has ever been since we started that 20 years ago, almost anyway, in 2025. 2005. 2025 will be the 20-year anniversary of that. So yeah, we'll be doing a lot more with our Starlink platform, and even looking at ways to expand upon that. They've made them so much more affordable now. I mean, it's incredible. It's starting to compete with my Verizon plans, you know? Seriously. Anyway, story for another day. I do like talking about this stuff with you guys, though, and we do that on these morning discussions, which I will be doing each morning of each Monday in the off season and beyond. I just think it's a good way to start the week. So if you missed today's morning discussion, it's on YouTube. Check it out. And every Monday, as long as I'm around, I mean, I might go out of town or something, we'll do it at least once a week. That's the point. Just kind of talk about stuff. You know, we're a good community here. We're growing, and I like sharing my ideas with you. And we do this together, all right? Because we're all in it together. So let's wrap this up with a look at the week ahead in the world of weather, the lower 48 anyway. Tropics, no problems there. Speaking of the tropics, let me just go back to the satellite imagery and just show you what the basin looks like real quick. Yeah, it's nice and scoured out. Cool, dry air in the northern latitudes. Dry air, very strong upper level winds in the deep tropics. Yeah, I mean, that's why we don't have hurricanes, even though the oceans out here are very much still warm. The upper level winds just don't support it. The thermodynamics are not there. And thus, here we are in winter weather mode. All right. The last of the lake effect plumes finally started to die away up here around most of the Great Lakes, which is good. Northwest flow coming through. Different disturbances. We call these Alberta clippers. Little small impulses that rotate around. A couple of those are going to come through over the next few days, but no big blockbuster, everybody sit around the TV and watch it kind of deal. Does anybody, hopefully, I mean, they watch something, internet, whatever, right? Nothing like that coming up. Just a few smaller garden variety winter clipper systems, whatever, and reinforcing shots of cold air. Now look, that being said, this is a pretty good indication, all these isobars up here, that the Northeast, the Great Lakes, as we get through the latter part of the week, mid to late week, it is going to be pretty stormy and blustery and just lots of snow everywhere up in that area. You know, from the UP of Michigan, upper Minnesota, or Wisconsin, all the way over to Maine. That looks kind of nasty. But widespread elsewhere, no, nothing at all. Zero out west, as you can see. But this big chunk of Arctic air coming down, that'll settle in one after the other, and then eventually the pattern will flip for a while. You know how this goes. It's back and forth during the winter months. It's just the pattern. That's the way it is. Finally, as we get to the early part of next week, we do see some more stormy weather coming into the Pacific Northwest, maybe some return Gulf moisture, possibility of some severe weather. So just pay attention. That's all we want to do, is just get you to pay attention to the weather. with so many different things going on in our lives, it's easy to forget, oh, yeah, I got to watch the weather. Yeah, it affects every single thing you do, including what you wear to school, work, or whatever, how your travel plans are going to be, and then things like the 2024 hurricane season, where you get the weather that is so disruptive it causes generational, long-lasting impacts to entire regions. I think that's why we are all so fascinated by it, because it is so much bigger than us. All right? Thanks for tuning in to today's update. As always, I hope you learned something. Please don't forget, like the video, do the little thumbs up thing. It's effortless, costless. You just do it. Share with your friends, your family, your colleagues. I appreciate that. And above all else, have a great rest of your week. And again, thank you for tuning in. From all of us at HurricaneTrack, I'm Mark Sudduth. I'll see you again in about a week.